Dyserth is a village on the edge of Denbighshire in North Wales, cut between a valley of two limestone hills. While the village prides itself on its beautiful waterfall, few actually recognise that this was also the site of England's first stone castle in North Wales. In this short documentary, I will be exploring the history of this forgotten fortress and revealing the truth behind its construction, importance, and its eventual downfall in the mid-13th century.
Standing next to the Clwyd River, which marked the border between England and Wales, and it was guarded by Tŵt Hill, the seat of power of Rhuddlan.
This green mound is Tŵt Hill, which is all that remains of the earthenworks beneath what would have been a wooden Motte Bailey castle. It was built by the Norman adventurer Robert of Rhuddlan in the years following the Norman conquest of England. Here, this fort kept watch over the River Clwyd, which for the following 200 years marked the border between North Wales and England. Being in such a strategic location along the border, Rhuddlan would be recognised as the chief military stronghold in Wales for the powerful Earls of Cheshire.
The English and the Welsh, between this border of Gwynedd and Chester, would constantly fight for 200 years since 1066, but for a brief moment in the 13th century, the Earl at the time, Lord John de Scotia, managed to broker a peace with the Welsh, and they managed to secure an alliance by marriage.
In the early 13th century, John de Scotia, a cousin to the King of Scotland at the time, inherited the Earldom of Cheshire by right of his mother. However, John was already an earl beforehand, having the Earldom of Huntingdon inherited from his father. Evidently, Earl John de Scotia was an especially powerful figure in England. Despite his status among the powerful earls in the kingdom, John was unmarried and without an heir, which risked the division of his lands to his three sisters upon his death. However, this was an opportunity for the earl, as not only would a marriage grant him children to inherit the earldoms, but also he could cement a strong alliance with even more military backing. In this instance, Earl John not only sought out a military alliance, but peace as well to the de facto king of the Welsh across his border in North Wales. Llywelyn the Great accepted the betrothal between the earl and his daughter, which created a lasting period of peace between the two regions. While the peace was favourable and lasting, the Earl John and his new wife, Ellen, had been married for well over 14 years now, and yet had no children between them. As age began catching up with them, it seemed even more unlikely that a birth would be possible.
The King of England at the time, Henry III, he saw Chester as this powerhouse in the northwest. It was one of the most important cities, most wealthy cities in the northwest at the time. And as a result of all the trade being brought through, it was bringing in all this foreign trade from Ireland, from Scotland. And with it came all this wealth. The king wanted every share of that. So he sent his knight, Simon de Montfort, to come to the city of Chester and convince the earl, who had no children, to give up the inheritance directly to the king, should he still continue not to have any children.
In medieval times, when the only remaining heirs are women, this has often been a cause for the king to step in and assume his authority over the estate. King Henry III of England recognised this issue and sent his favourite courtier, Simon de Montfort, to act on his behalf and convince the aging and childless Earl to give up the inheritance on his death to the crown.
There is still an opportunity for John de Scotia to still have some children, but towards the second half of 1237 AD, he suddenly died, and then the land was passed over to the king.
It's unknown how exactly he died, but his still capable age and the opportunistic window for people to inherit the earldom suggests something maliciously organised against the Earl. Nevertheless, after tedious bartering with the late Earl's sisters, the king finally bought off the estates and claimed fully the earldom of Cheshire as his own.
So the king now has access to the Dee River and all of its trade coming through from Ireland and Scotland and all these foreign goods promoting his wealth, which not only does it help support the earldom of Chester itself, all that money is now coming down to London to his own personal pocket. So it's at this point they started to invest it in a lot of projects that he's been meaning to get done. For example, the Castle of London was vastly expanded in 1238, and on its completion he also had Chester expanded as well, giving it a half-mean tower, some gatehouses. Its outer wall was also built from stone as well. So now, with all this money that the king has now got in his pocket, it's not only going towards architectural improvements of his castles and his fortifications, but also to infrastructure and public works, such as this bridge, which was built, or the construction was started between the mid-13th century and it finished later towards the end of the century. But it was a remarkable structure that replaced the wooden bridge at the time, marking as a monument to the king's success in claiming this land. Not only that, in Chester, he also planned to have the border of Wales being fortified as well, and he wanted to replace the two-till Motte Bailey Castle with a stone castle.
The death of the late Earl also meant the end of the period of peace, as the end of the marriage to Ellen Ferch Llewellyn ended the alliance with it. Conflict was just around the corner again in North Wales, and the king had to act fast to secure his rule over his new lands in Wales. The Welsh up to this period had built themselves stone strongholds and halls that far outmatched the outdated style of Retelling Castle, which as we know was just a wooden bottom Bailey style of castle. The Welsh amassed a capable military strength that King Henry recognised as a threat that would easily storm Cheshire at any moment. A new fortification had to be built to replace Rhuddlan and re-establish English dominance over the Clwyd Vale.
So Henry III had decided that this area needed a new castle to replace the castle at Rhuddlan. It needed a stone castle on a high advantage point, and it was here that they built Dyserth Castle. On this limestone rock, it would be known as the Castle on the Rock, or Cathalan. Dyserth Castle was notably the first stone castle in this area in Wales, before the likes of the new stone castle at Rhuddlan Castle, before Flint, before Conwy and Arfon. It was the first one ever built in North Wales.
Further east from Rhuddlan rose the Vale Hills that stood strong with their limestone cliffs. Around this large rock was a small stream passing by, ideal for fresh water. Here King Henry ordered the construction of his new castle and appointed Sir Robert Poundling as its constable.
So they built the stone castle, but King Henry wasn't pleased with it. He wanted it to be even better, or better at defences, bigger even as well. We're not entirely certain, but there was, halfway through the construction phase, the castle was either completely renovated, expanded, or the whole castle was taken down and rebuilt again until it finally was finished in 1241.
After its completion, another construction took place at the site, which reveals that either a large portion of the castle was significantly extended, or in fact the entire castle was stripped down and rebuilt from the ground up to better suit the king's demands. It seems from this act alone that wealth was in surplus for this luxury of reconstruction. However, it could also reveal the desperate measure of having this castle built before the Welsh decided to act sooner. Eventually, Dyserth Castle was completed, and Sir Robert Poundling had himself not only a castle fit for living richly in his new hall, but there was significant space inside the walls for a large garrison to be stationed. This stone castle truly marked the English dominance in the region, and Sir Robert Poundling was now at the head of its control.
He decided, in celebration of the castle's construction, to have a tournament.
With the castle complete, it was Robert's priority to signify his authority, but also his strength in the region at the behest of his king. The Welsh would not dare yet attack his newly built castle, but Robert invited them nevertheless to a fair contest at a tournament in his well-defended land. This would be an opportunity to show off the strength of the English compared to the Welsh knights, to further establish the superiority of the English control over the Clwyd Vale.
So this tournament would not only just be an invitation to English knights of great acclaim, but also to Welsh knights. It was sought to broker not just England's more mighty now, it's got this grand castle, but it's also a chance to prove that through prowess they can also beat the Welsh in tournaments. But it was an opportunity, a fair fight, to allow the Welsh to take part too, and give them a bit of a chance to prove themselves without war and bloodshed.
Not only would his personal militia and knights take part in this tournament, but he himself would face off the Welsh champions in an attempt to legitimise his prowess. Knights from all over England and Wales would travel far to take part in this grand tournament, hoping to achieve glory, fame, and of course, plenty of wealth.
It was here in the lands of Dyserth where the tournament would take place. Robert Poundling spent a lot of money to make sure that this was a grand event. He wanted not only to show off the prowess of the English knights, but it was also a position where he could put power in himself, making sure that everybody that comes knows that he is the new lord, the constable of all this land. He had a statement to make, and that's why he even took part in this tournament himself.
After many fights and bouts, Sir Robert Poundling entered into the tournament victorious after a number of duels. He challenged if any Welshman would approach, and he would defeat him with ease. From the crowd came forth a Welsh knight of little renown, Sir Theodore, who raised his sword and accepted the challenge.
Not much is known about him other than his name, but he was a Welsh knight and he fought and challenged Sir Robert Poundling at his own tournament. They fought it out, and after 3 bouts, they were scrambling on the floor. It was unclear who was going to win. None of them was calling it off. None of them were willing to yield. And it got to a point where the knight Sir Theodore, he took out his dagger and he got Sir Robert Poundling in a lock and he got him jabbed right in the eye, taking it out.
The physicians of the castle came quickly to tend to their lord's wounds and were successful in stopping the bleeding and avoiding infection. Unfortunately, Sir Robert lost his eye entirely, and Sir Theodore was proclaimed the victor of the tourney. When asked whether he would face off the Welsh again, Sir Robert declined with, "I would not intend for a Welshman to beat out my other eye."
So the tournament didn't quite have the effect that Sir Robert Poundling desired. In fact, it even showed a weakness in England, that even an experienced English knight could be so bested to such a state by a Welsh knight. And so the Welsh saw this as a good opportunity to finally lay an attack on the English.
It seemed clear now to the Welsh after this tournament that the English knights stationed in North Wales were no match to the prowess of the Welsh equivalent. And in the following years, Llywelyn ap Griffith, the newly recognised king of the Welsh, would march his forces across the River Clwyd.
Llywelyn, ruler of Gwynedd, managed to muster his forces in his lands over the river, and he crossed over, bypassing Toot Hill and the Mottebelly Castle that stood here, until he went on further along into the hills of the Clwyd Vale.
As expected of the wooden castle at Toot Hill, it was promptly defeated with ease, and the army was in a great position of strength to take control over the entire valley. However, Llywelyn's control could not pass over the hills, not until they would have to meet the looming castle on the rock.
It would be easy enough for the army to just simply go around, but that would mean the garrison could easily just pick apart their baggage train behind them, taking out all of their supplies. So that wasn't really an option for Llywelyn. So the only option he had available was to besiege the castle itself. It was the strongest fort in North Wales, held by the English, and as much as a challenge it was, Llywelyn would be left with no choice other than to retreat. So he laid siege on the castle.
With no other choice ahead, lest the army supply chain be completely cut off, Llywelyn could not ignore Dyserth Castle. the formidable stone castle had to be laid siege to. The castle supplies were large enough for only 1 or 2 years of blockade at best, so with the added anxiety of reinforcements from Chester, the Welsh had to sit and wait with a careful watch as long as they could. What would have been 2 years at the longest became a grueling 7 years of siege. It is evident from this time frame that the king's forces at Chester would repeatedly send help and attack the sieging army countless times, making it difficult to besiege or fully take Dyserth in one go. The castle would not fall, and so long as Chester was there to support them, the Welsh had no chance to succeed. Meanwhile in England, the very same night that King Henry sent to convince the late Earl of Chester to grant the earldom over to the crown actually later went against the king and began the Second Barons' War. Some earls voluntarily supported Simon de Montfort, while others, like Cheshire, he took by force from the crown.
The rebellion was now in full swing, and Simon de Montfort even had the upper hand. He captured the king, and this was enough leverage to convince the Welsh to support his claim.
Simon de Montfort managed to broker military support between Llywelyn and the rebels, which meant at last Cheshire no longer supported King Henry's control over North Wales. Llywelyn's army stormed through the castle, although losing many of his own knights in the assault, such as the subject of a local memorial cross, Enyon, son of Rhydred Flaith, who would be slain by a loose arrow.
So at last, Dyserth Castle was finally completely destroyed by the Welsh forces with the support of Simon de Montfort. But things turned around at the end as Simon de Montfort was actually defeated in the Battle of Evesham. It was the turning point in the rebellion, and Edward, the son of the king, released his father, and Simon de Montfort was put to death.
In the following 2 years, Simon de Montfort would at last be defeated by the Prince Edward. Control would eventually be re-established in North Wales, and Llywelyn's forces would be driven back to Gwynedd, before being completely conquered in the following decades. However, the English would never again rebuild Dyserth, and it stood for centuries a monument to the first of many stone castles the English would fortify North Wales with.
After the Battle of Evesham, Edward came out victorious, and in the following years after, Dyserth would not be rebuilt ever again. However, in its legacy, there was a void, a power void here in North Wales that still the Welsh could still take advantage of. There was no longer that defence. So in the years later, Edward came with an architect from Switzerland to build multiple stone castles, even larger than Dyserth.
Dyserth Castle would be replaced by a new stone castle, Rhuddlan, built close to the site of Toot Hill, standing tall and larger than even the castle on the rock. Conwy, Carnarvon, Flint and Denbigh would be castles built following the success and failure of Dyserth. For 700 years, the ruins continued to stand until World War I, which demanded a need for the quarrying of the site for the local infrastructure. Few pictures were taken of the site before its complete demolishment due to the quarrying, and now the ruins today are completely covered by nature, and only a few earthen mounds exist where the foundations used to lie.
And so that for now marks the end of this story about Dyserth Castle, its context for its construction, its tournaments, and its eventual destruction, and complete destruction during World War I as well. But we're still able to continue that story now by hosting reenactments in the local area, reminding the history of this site and its importance to the number of beautiful villages around the site, and able to share with you a long-lost history that is yet to be revealed.
This short documentary has been brought to you by the Three Lads Reenactment Society, and thank you for watching.
Is this here behind me?
No, give me a second, I just put it on my fat face.
Wood was able to fortify Chester. When I've got that. The top.
What's that?
Oh, big Oh, come on, it's Big Bessie.
Big giant girl. Oh yeah.
Oh, I think it was more than that. Thanks to Three Lads Society, we're able to bring light.
Skibbity Sigma.
Llewellyn o Gwyned's force.
Stop recording me. This guy's a camera guy. He's the one who's very attractive.
Talk about Chester.
So Chester Castle, 10 out of 10. Phelan, mighty castle. It's a mighty castle. Really stands. Mighty castle.
Oh yeah.
There once was a town called England.
What are you laughing about?
Thank you for watching. Every time you stomp, there's a bit of an earthquake, isn't there?
They call me Robert Panley.
Take 3.
This is not going in bloopers, okay? There aren't going to be bloopers.
No bloopers. Bye bye.